Hi class, we are going to move on to chapter 7 and 8, which addresses leadership in small groups and by extension in organizations as well. And I should say that we're drawing most of this material out of a small group text, but this pretty much applies to organizational communication as well. As you'll see, the next four chapters are broken up in the same way. They begin with the more theoretical aspects of the topic, and then the next chapter deals with the more practical. As far as leadership goes, I will say that most people believe that leadership is really important in small group work and in organizations. However, not everybody believes it is of the same importance. My personal opinion is that it's really important. So here we go. What are we going to be looking at? We're going to be looking at what are the sources of leadership. That mostly comes from power. It also can just emerge. There are traditional examinations of leadership in small groups according to the individual's traits and what their styles might be. There's contemporary approaches. There's always going to be followers along with leaders. So we'll look at that dynamic and then the practical tips. So the ability to influence others stems from the power derived from a particular source. So there's three potential sources for these powers. Legitimate power stems from a title or role acknowledged by followers. Referent power is based on attraction or identification with another person. And expert power comes from what others believe a member knows or can accomplish. It's interesting to note that leaders are not always designated. Sometimes they emerge from the group itself. They start out at the same level as other members and emerge as the leader over time. So it's not something that's always selected before the group work begins. In many ways, this is better because people start out as equals, and on a human level, people are still equal, but in terms of their position within the group or the organization, through their leadership, communication, and behavior, the other members designate this person as a leader. Self-monitoring is just kind of being conscious of what you say and what you do. And verbal styles have a lot to do with who can possibly emerge from the group. Traditional approaches to leadership. So we're going back a little ways in time. The traits approach, the earliest studies of the traits approach assume that people were collections of relatively fixed traits, with one leadership situation being much like another. Traits approach researchers believe that leaders were born, not made, and look for the traits that distinguish leaders from followers. Some studies found that leaders tended to have higher IQs and were taller, more attractive, and larger than non-leaders. But as you might guess, there simply is no trait or combination of traits that leaders have, but other members don't. There's a lot of examples of this. This is before your time, but go back and look at some presidential candidates who were not really considered tall at all. So like Ross Perot, which is before your time, he was an independent candidate. several years ago. He was a pretty smallish man, but wasn't elected, but he was a great leader, extremely wealthy and successful business person as well. Modern traits approaches look at personality characteristics: enthusiasm, verbal facility, creativity, critical thinking, and self-confidence. These seem a little more realistic to explain how some people become leaders. Then there's styles. Okay, there are different types of styles. Go ahead and read this slide in more depth in your text. But I think you can just tell by the descriptions at the top: autocratic, democratic, and laissez-faire, how those kinds of styles might work. And when you go into the professional world, you're going to see all these. We live in a democracy, but that doesn't mean that all leaders are democratic, meaning they look for participation, they invite input, they make suggestions, they involve the group in decisions. Okay? Sometimes you're going to come across leaders, and this might apply to the group itself. You might have a leader. Autocratic's probably not good for your group project, but you might have a leader who's more laissez-faire. They want the group to they facilitate the group to make decisions. And as it's described here, I suppose it's not really advisable. The way they're describing laissez-faire is that is a little too passive. However, the point I want to make is that you're going to come across bosses who are going to be, the easiest way to describe it is hands-on or hands-off. Some bosses are hands-on, which a lot of people don't like, where they feel like somebody's looking over their shoulder, and other bosses are, a little too hands-off. So, but most bosses and leaders fall along this spectrum. There's what's called, in contemporary approaches, functional contingency and competence. Go ahead and read through those. Task and social functions in the functional. Contingency is more where the actions match situational characteristics of the group. And then communication competence is more purely communication driven. This is a situational model. This shows how certain leaders help the group and the organization get the job done. If you look on each of the axes, the vertical is more relationship behavior, and the horizontal axis is more task behavior. So task and social emotional, or directive, otherwise called directive or supportive behavior. I think that you look at the bottom left and you get somebody who delegates a lot. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Some leaders are really good at just handing out things and delegating the tasks to others. And then if you look at the top right, you've got what's called coaching. And that person is going to be a little more hands-on and help people get to reach their goals. Leaders need followers, and it's you've heard this term before, interdependent. It's an interdependent relationship. It's an interdependent relationship between the communication behavior of the leader and the behavior, skills, preferences, and expectations of the member, also known as the leader-member exchange model. And then you have what's called transformational leadership, something different. There's somebody who's just the force of their personality is so strong. I put a current CEO in here, Elon Musk, who some of you might know leads several different companies, an electric car company, a rocket company, and he's just a big personality. Recently, he's been kind of getting some bad press. He's over the top, but his style really motivates a lot of people. And you can also think of somebody like Steve Jobs, one of the founders of Apple Computer. He was a transformational leader as well. What about practical tips? The book points out more kind of administrative functions for a leader. Not that these aren't important, these are really important in terms of identifying goals, setting and handling meetings, recording information, kind of setting the agenda, helping to regulate and structure communication. And put a little note here, Robert's Rules of Orders. That's not me, not this Robert. That's a parliamentary process by which decisions get done. I have mixed feelings about it. I think it can tend to slow things down kind of unnecessarily. It just prescribes a step for every kind of decision and getting buy-in and people seconding motions and stuff like that. So for some purposes, academia very much uses Robert's Rules of Orders, but in other situations, it might slow things down a little too much, where sometimes you need to make quick decisions and move fast. Another item that the text points out is make sure that everybody has the opportunity to participate. So a leader can drive that. I'm a little not sure about the equality part. I don't think everybody has to participate equal. Everybody should be treated as an equal and as an equal human being. But I think we get a little too caught up that everything's kind of got to be cookie cutter and pie sliced. So there doesn't need to be exact equality in participation. And I think you're going to find that doesn't really happen much anyhow. Leaders are going to do more. Leaders are kind of naturally, they're going to do more. In terms, you want creative and critical thinking, creativity and critical thinking to be maximized. What does that mean? Brainstorm. Be open-minded, be patient. Things don't happen immediately. And test your propositions if you can, and continually improve. Finally, this chapter 8, closes on the importance of group interaction and leadership, and trust is very important. I know some of you might not know each other well, but I do hope that trust exists in your group. The stakes aren't the highest. I know you all want to get a good grade. If you do the work, you should be in pretty good shape for that. But stakes are a little higher when you're on the job and your rent and your family and everything depends on it. So trust is really important. Always act ethically. That's a little bit, that's obvious. And I just think the text falls a little short here on the practical tips, a little kind of boring. I would say if you want to be a transformative leader like Elon Musk or Steve Jobs or Oprah or many other people, a lot of the presidential candidates, go for it. Be transformative. Be the next Klobuchar or whoever is running for president. You can do that.